Good evening. Thank you very much for this introduction. And I want to say I'm thrilled to be here, and I think all of us are thinking very intensively about the events that are occurring on our European continent. It's soon going to be 1 year since the war started, the war of aggression against Ukraine. And I think many of us probably remember where we were on the 24th of February 2022. It's an absolutely historical date, the most tragic, violent war in Europe since 1945. I think we still are trying to understand this earthquake for all of us. I think all of us are a little bit traumatized, of course, in different ways. But if you're here, I think you want to try to understand this situation better, how we came to this, how Russia came to this action, war of aggression, and the mechanisms and the trends that led to this tragedy. Of course, those who suffer the most from this war are the Ukrainians, and I think many will agree that we all believe that the Ukrainians need to be supported and helped as much as needed for this war to end in the best possible way, which is the liberation of their territory. And I would say that we all, as Europeans of different nationalities, wherever we come from, we have a responsibility. I feel this deeply as somebody who worked in Russia and Ukraine as a journalist in my career and saw democratic transitions. We have had democratic transitions in many countries in Europe. We had a democratic transition in Spain. I think it's interesting to think about democratic transitions and to have hope in the fact that there can also be one day a democratic transition in Russia. So we will think about all these questions today. And my only comment before I say just a very few brief words about our excellent speakers. I'm honored to be next to these excellent, wonderful people who I've admired for a long time and the work they do. I want to say that for me, as a journalist who worked in the former Soviet bloc after '91 and in Central Europe, I see two wars. I see the war that is happening in Ukraine with all the images that you see on television, on your smartphones, and I see another war which is very different, of course. But I see a war in Russia. It's Putin's war against civil society, and this is a war that we see less images of, and we think about it a bit less. And we have two people from Memorial here who will be able to tell us a little bit more about what is going on inside Russia, why Russia came to this situation, and what we need to do or what we can do to get out of this tragedy. What we're going to do is we have 1 hour and a half. So I'm going to give each of the speakers 7-10 minutes to give their thoughts. I told them there are two things that if everybody in the room can come out with two things. One is a key idea of how we got to this situation. A key idea, what did we miss? What did we not understand about Russia? What did we not know about Ukraine? What did we not do? So that first thing, kto vinovat? Who's guilty? What did we miss? And the second question is, what can we do? And I think it's important to think about things in an active way, in a proactive way. And people here are very active. So what is the best thing we can do? What is the most important thing we can do? Что делать? So we're going to start with Mykola, a wonderful writer, thinker from Ukraine, and who's been thinking and writing a lot about identity, Europeanness, Ukraine, and we are all discovering the importance of Ukraine, belatedly, but now we know how important Ukraine is. And then I will give the floor to Elena Zhemkova, the head of Memorial, as was said, Nobel Peace Prize, a wonderful prize, but in tragic circumstances, as we know. But the team continues to work. It's very important to say the team of Memorial continues to work. And then we will hear from Grigory Shvedov, who arrived yesterday from Moscow. And so he will have very fresh impressions to share with us and thoughts about the atmosphere in Russia. What is it like now? And what hopes could there be for something a little bit better? And then we will discuss a little bit, and then we will have questions. I think some questions will be given to me on paper. I think it's great if it's an active discussion and if we have a conversation. Thank you very much for being here, and Mykola, please kick us off.
Okay, thank you, Natalia, for this very nice introduction, and of course, many thanks to organizers for making this meeting possible. I believe it's very important to keep the developments in that region on screen, on our radars, even though it's a very remote region, far away from Spain, far away from Madrid. But I believe it's very, very important, very crucial for today and for the future of Europe. As I understand, you formulated your two main questions in a style of Russian classical literature, which was traditionally preoccupied with these two fundamental questions: who is guilty, who is to blame, and what is to be done. It's much easier to answer the first question and very difficult to answer the second one. The first question, of course, is topical. We have to come to terms with our joint responsibility for what has happened, because I believe that we all sleepwalked into today's situations. We failed to properly notice, to discern tendencies in that part of Europe. The growth of fascist dictatorship, which is today in Russia, but also, as you mentioned very aptly, Putin's war with civil society, which began long before all other wars, actually, or maybe simultaneously. And this, both kinds of wars were underestimated, but this war against civil society was in particular ignored. This destruction of independent mass media, which began 20 years ago, actually, not recently. So, of course, we have our own share of responsibility. Of course, I'm not in position to talk much about responsibility of Russian intellectuals. They have their own share, and they probably can define it much better than myself. I can tell a little bit about Western responsibility because I closely observed Western policies vis-à-vis both Ukraine and Russia, and I believe that these policies were fundamentally based on wrong assumptions. They were based on what I call imperial knowledge, Russian imperial knowledge. And we still have this problem to deconstruct, to analyze this imperial knowledge. Imperial knowledge, which I understand as a system of ideas which were developed since 18th century by the Russian Empire, which were disseminated internationally, which were aimed at silencing and subjugation of all subordinated nations and nationalities, and unfortunately knowledge which became international knowledge, which was institutionalized in international academia, in universities, in mass media, in pop culture, in high culture. It became normalized, it became unquestioned, unproblematic. You can take a look at 10 editions, for example, of Rasanovsky's History of Russia, which are reprinted and repeated, and many generations of scholars, not only probably in America, but also in Europe, grew up with this knowledge, which makes no difference between Russia and Rus, which pronounces many other stupid ideas, and they became unquestionable. Everybody knows, yes, Rus and Russia, there is the same. Of course, it's not the same. It's as odd as equating of Romania and ancient Rome. Yes, they have something in common, Romania and Rome, but, very different entities. And there are a lot of such, false facts. I believe that, all of them created absolutely false perception of that region, false perception of Russia, and false perception of developments in Russia, in particular since 1990. And of course, Ukraine was completely marginalized, neglected, and excluded from all European projects. It was placed into Russian sphere of influence, and so on. So, you know, I can talk a lot about this, but again, it's much better for Westerners to do themselves their soul searching and coming to terms with this false knowledge, which was internalized by Western societies and still is alive and well, and still we hear all these strange things about Crimea, which was internally Russian and passed by Khrushchev to Ukraine, as if nothing was before that, you know, as if there were no 500 of Crimean and Tatar statehood and genocide of Crimean and Tatars there, and so on. So, you know, a lot of things which should be reconsidered and revised. I prefer to say maybe a few words about Ukraine's responsibility in this situation, because it's my own soul searching. And I believe we have two kinds of responsibility. One of them is, of course, obvious. Ukraine was independent. Ukraine appeared to be heavily Sovietized, Russified, and communized, so to say. And of course, Ukraine failed to carry out fast reforms, to jump into this European wagon like Poland did, or Estonia, or Latvia. So, of course, we share our part of responsibility, because we were not prepared for very fast, effective, efficient reforms, and radical break with Soviet legacy, with Soviet colonialism, and so on. So that's our part of guilt. But also, of course, we have kind of historical responsibility, because it was Ukrainian intellectuals, by the way, who created all this idea of continuity between Kiev and Moscow, who created this idea of Little Russia and Great Russia. It was Ukrainian intellectuals who were hired by Peter the Great in the early 18th century, and they developed this idea. They had this crazy idea of joint venture, so to say. They believed that we are from a small part of Rus, and we contribute our own share into this common enterprise, and we may be a kind of partners there. Of course, they lost, but they are responsible for all this imperial knowledge. Basically, they've laid fundamentals of this knowledge. Of course, they pursued their own corporatist ideas, not nationalistic of any kind. So we all have our own responsibility. We all have to analyze it, to deconstruct, and to come to terms, and to decolonize our consciousness. It's crucial today. What is to be done is a more complicated issue. I have no recipes for Russians here. I believe that, of course, civil society is important, and the only way to change whatsoever in any country is, of course, through evolution. Even though I participated in 2 revolutions in Ukraine, but I believe that revolutions do not solve the problems. Revolutions can only unblock evolutionary development. So basically, all the problems are solved by evolution. But at some point, evolutionary development is blocked by various obstacles, typically by authoritarian regimes, by dictatorial regimes. In this case, they should be unblocked. In this case, revolution is needed. But revolution is needed only to unblock, to open the way, to destroy the dam. All the things should be done evolutionary. So, of course, we cannot do anything without civil society, without civic organizations. And I perfectly understand this, and I was engaged throughout all my life in various all kinds of civic activities, starting from samizdat activity in Soviet times, and heading Ukraine Pen Center within the past 8 years. But as to Ukraine, the only thing we can do now for ourselves and for Europe and for Russia, I hope, and for Belarus and maybe for Spain, we have to withstand this assault. We have to win this war. We have to lead to the collapse of the Russian dictatorial regime, to discredit it, to delegitimize as much as possible, and ultimately to lead to its collapse. I don't believe that today any kind of democratization can occur in Russia. Today's Russia is fascist dictatorship. It's country kind of Stalin's Russia, of maybe of Brezhnev's Russia. So, you know, there are no elites which can come instead and can be much better. Khrushchev was Stalin's cadre, Stalin's lieutenant, Stalin's servant. Gorbachev, who replaced Brezhnev, also was very loyal Brezhnevist. So probably something like this will happen in Russia. Some bodies, some people from the same milieu, which are not much better, but they can be more rational, more sober-minded, less fanatical, less obsessed with final solution of Ukraine question, less obsessed with global hegemony and so on. So I have this hope. We can contribute to this change, I believe. We should contribute to this change.
How? If you give one answer
Ukraine is doing real job. Ukraine is fighting. This is the only thing we can do. We can resist, we can fight, we can defeat this ugly aggressor state. And it should be defeated. Finally, it should be stopped, because they would move as far as they can. Until and unless they are stopped, they would move. Don't have any illusions. You know. Actually, we observed this, how they moved into Chechnya, how they moved to Syria, how they moved into Georgia, how they moved to Crimea. They were not stopped. It's not enough. It was not enough to take Crimea. They could keep Crimea. Nobody fought there. So, you know, finally it should be stopped, because otherwise, you know, you would have this plague spreading, and any rogue state can use military force, can use nuclear blackmail in order to achieve its particular bully goals. So we do what we can. As to Europeans, I believe they also have to understand that this is not Ukraine's war, it's European war, it's the war of democratic society, it's war of principles, of values, and we either be ready to defend our principles and values and norms or not. Of course, I understand it's uncomfortable. You may have your energy bills a bit higher, you may have some prices a bit higher, you may spend 10 or 20 or even 100 euro more a year, but this is the price. This price of Ukraine paying the same price with their lives, so please remember this. It might be uncomfortable, it might be a bit colder in winter, a bit hotter in summer, because you have 1 degree, would have 1 degree less for air conditioner and so on, but it's the price. So much we have to do this. And as for Russians, I believe they know better themselves what to do. It's a very difficult situation, but you have experience of Germans under Nazis. They resisted. Differently, both in immigration and in Germany, but they resisted. Resistance is always possible. There is always some room, some space for honest people, however difficult that it might be. And we know this. We know this from Soviet times. We know this from other totalitarian regimes. It's difficult, but it's possible.
Thank you, Mykola. Elena, resistance is possible. Memorial. How we got here, how we got to this situation, and the other question: what should we do? What could we best do?
Well, before answering, I would like to point something. First of all, I would like to thank you for this congratulation with the Nobel Prize. It is very important for us. But the most important thing, perhaps, is that this prize had been received by people from 3 countries: our friends from Belarus, our friends from Ukraine, and us from Russia. And I think it's a very important sign, and I think it's very important to remember it, to highlight it, that the Nobel Prize separates between a person and a country. A person is not the same as the country where he or she lives. It's a sign that we are normal people who want to protect the human dignity and the normal peace and living, and we can try to do that together. That's what I was going to say. I have been called a memorial leader. It's not exactly the thing. Dear Spaniard, here in Madrid, we could meet here so many people that we have not done before for many months. Here we have representative of Italian, Ukrainian, German memorial. I see here leaders of the human rights movement. My colleague is from Syktyvkar, from Perm, and I think it's very important that memorial is never one leader. We are a lot of people, and we are working together. So before answering these very difficult questions, I wanted to just to point out something, some small things. When the system collapses and we go to archives, we can access the archives, we will be able to see the whole situation, the real documents, to understand who took decisions, and then we will carry out our normal work as organization of memory. Now, I think it's very important to understand that memorial was created after a huge catastrophe, and as a response to this catastrophe, as a wish, as a desire of many people, of a huge amount of people, to know the truth and to fight for the truth. To avoid this catastrophic situations, this number of victims. We wanted to understand how the state got out of the control. And we did many things, and we can speak about outcomes of our activities. But I think we did not do the most important thing, because we are returning to a world in which a state is criminal and commits crimes every day, and there are victims every day. That means that we were not able to do what we just wanted to do. I suppose that the formula of memorial that we had, our idea was very simple. We thought that justice had to be the same for everyone, independently of if it's a nice person or not nice person. But the victims have to receive compensation, and the criminals has to be punished. So for the memory of the victims, we did a lot for the memory of the victims. For tens of years, we worked, created a database with more than 60,000 names. We worked on compensations, on books, on research. We worked with people. But to name the criminals, and not only name them, but also to punish them, to condemn them, we were not able to do that. That's why we are now living in a country where people is in fear. It's the prevalent feeling there in Russia. People are in fear. There are people who are able to be brave. My friends from Czechoslovakia was saying in 1968, when just seven people went to the Red Square to protest against the Soviet invasion into Czechoslovakia. So my Czech friends said we had 7 reasons for not to hate Russia and Russians. Now there are more than 20,000 penal causes against people who are protesting. It's not a lot, but we have 20,000 reasons to understand that not all the Russians are scared. And trying to answer to your question about what to do, I would say that, first of all, we have to help Ukraine to be victorious in this war. It will be also our victory. Second, it's very important to help the people, also those who left Russia. They have to feel that they are important and they are a force, that they are people that can serve as a support. And the third thing that I would say, that it's very important to show to people who are scared, who are under pressure. Well, it's actually very silly to say to someone, you don't have to be scared. It's impossible. But if we say to these people who are scared, we are going to try to help you, you are not alone. Try just be a little bit more brave. I think this is the way we can go. And Memorial just has to keep working. Memorial in many countries, in Italy, in Ukraine, in Russia, in Germany, in Poland, in Czechia, and perhaps in France. Yes, sure, in France, and also perhaps in Spain. Oh, I had to mention France, of course, and perhaps also in Spain. Thank you very much, Lena. So, Grigory, I don't know if I have to repeat these questions.
Will have a special value, for me at least, because you just came from Moscow, as I said earlier, and I think it's important to. It's great that you could come. Tell us how, on top of my two easy questions, how did we get here? What to do next? If you can tell us a little bit about the atmosphere and how you feel coming from Russia and how you feel about the situation.
Thanks for inviting and organizing all of that. My name is Grigory Shvedov. I come from Russia. We work for media which covers 20 regions of the Caucasus called Caucasian North, established by Memorial a long time ago, more than 21 years ago. We cover mostly Caucasus, so it's independent countries, unrecognized regions, and partly it's Russia, which changes from time to time. Since in 2008, some regions of Georgia became occupied as well. I would really not feel comfortable to say who is guilty, because from one side it's obvious, and it was just described by the colleagues here, but from the other side it's a lot, I think, personal question for many of us, even those who sit here, because the region we are working with is a region where human rights violations, including torture, kidnapping, is going all the time. For decades. And my input into the discussion of a topic, what should be done, is quite practical. I believe that each of us, and including everyone sitting here, should invest his or her time into that attention. We are missing too many facts of violence, of crime. It's so easy just to invest a little bit of your time. I have an idea of a half an hour a week, 4 minutes a day. Each of us sitting here in a platform you prefer, You can use whatever platform, but really invest your time in deeply reading what's going on in Ukraine now. But apart from what's going on now, where the really tragedy is happening every minute, every day, there are so many places we really forgot. We really are not focusing on. There is, for example, in terms of our work, Karabakh, where every day now is a day of blockade. And in our work, we're trying not to say who is right and who is wrong. We're trying not to answer the question who is guilty. Our reporters are working in Baku, in Yerevan, and in Karabakh and Stepanakert. We're trying not to say who is guilty. We're trying to show what is going on right now. But in order to not maybe have an impact, but at least some influence to the situation, we really need your attention. If you really have only time for Twitter, it is available in English. If you have more time and you can watch things in YouTube, it is available there. There are a lot of sources of information. There is a lot of data available, but there are less people who can spend their time and sometimes just to put very basic reaction, which is so much needed for the people. I believe, I don't know what you think, but I really I really believe in this idea, who really need attention. Because we, in a work in a small region of the Caucasus, had so many examples that attention really influenced, then people who never came to this region, but just because they commented, just because they watched, really made a difference. And I see Pilar here, a famous journalist who was covering a long time ago ongoing incidents in Chechnya, where the unknown men from the paintball guns were shooting women who have not long enough sleeves, and they've been shooting these women from the cars, and no one knew who these people are. And it was less reporting about this case. And I remember how you did your report. And no one was really recognizing this case unless someone brave shared the video. Someone brave, because the video was made from the car. So it was obvious that those people, they themselves have been making this footage, and it was actually easy to find the source. But someone brave gave that video, and we published it. And even though afterwards YouTube blocked it because of the strange rules of YouTube, so many people watched that. So many people that even such a bloody dictator as Ramzan Kadyrov had to comment. And his comment was nasty. He said that if I would know these people who are shooting women on the Avenue of Putin, it was happening by the way, I would thank them. I would give them awards. But as a lot of things in Russia, this Byzantine logic was in place. Even though he said so, just the moment he said that words, it was no more shooting. It stopped. And I believe that so many people who just watched that video long time ago, it was not so popular with social media at that time, they made that difference. And certainly someone brave who shared that footage. And I believe that a lot of us can react to what is happening, can watch, we can make more difference than we are making today. So that's my answer to the question on what we can do.
Thank you, Grigory. And listening to this comment about how important it is that information comes out and that people outside the dictatorship pay attention to that information, that really reminds me of everything I read about the period of Soviet dissidents. Really, how important it was that they could bring out information to the West. And we heard about the end, the steps that led to the end of the Cold War, the agreement between Reagan and Gorbachev, and we find ourselves having to refer to a period that is indeed the period of a clash between democracies and an authoritarian system. I wanted to ask all of you, and thank you for these wonderful remarks, which all of them open different roads of discussion. But I wanted to share one thought with you and ask you to react to it. It seems to me that a key reason for this war, for the beginning of this war, is that for Putin's power system, a Ukraine that is democratic, liberal democratic, and not just turned towards Europe, but becoming a full-fledged actor in the European family, gradually, was something that was too politically dangerous for his power system. The threat for him was of democratic contagion, like a virus that he didn't want to see come into Russia. Do you agree with this idea that Ukraine was too dangerous an example for Putin because Russians could see next door a large Slavic nation taking a completely different path? So he decided to destroy this example. This is an idea that I'm sharing. I'm not very original, but I believe it. What are your thoughts on this? And if you could add your thoughts about how do you actually measure Putin's popularity today in Russia? Many people say outside of Russia, yeah, but he's doing horrible things, but he's still popular. What would you answer to that? Whoever wants to start. Maybe Grisha, maybe Grigory. You.
To start about amount of people who really like Putin, I need to say, first of all, that the independent survey company Levada Center was listed foreign agent, as we have been. It's very complicated now to do analysis survey to find out how much someone is popular. I was saying earlier today, I think in a consciousness of a Russian man and woman, there are two things on the same time. A lot of people in the suburbs of Russia and in Moscow would tell you how dissatisfied they are with education, with the health system, with the prices on food, with employment, and the same people would say that Putin is a great guy. We don't have opposition for many years. The most famous oppositionist, Alexei Navalny, is in prison. So Russian propaganda is working well. And a lot of people had that feeling that there is someone good on the top who is not responsible for all the roads which are destroyed, for all kids who are dying in hospitals, and many other systemic problems like corruption as well. So I don't buy the idea that Putin is very popular, but certainly if elections would happen in a month from now, he would win. The question is, how accurate is this model? Then the different analysts in academia are using this model. For example, the false model order or democracy. That's not correct. We don't need to choose order or democracy. It's certainly a lot of people who say, so yeah, we need order. Stalin was a great guy. But we don't need to choose between the rule of law, the order, and democracy. We don't need to think about current officials in 1 month. Certainly, if it would be real political competition, it would be very challenging, and we already saw in a number of Russian regions how opposition might win. And it's not very much always the case about liberal opposition. It might be people who, for example, communists, who are very positively talking about Stalin, but still are in opposition to Putin, some kind of opposition. So I don't buy the argument that it is very popular. But I don't know if I answer all, but to have colleagues to talk.
Elena, would you like to try, or any of you?
Yeah.
Я все-таки хочу напомнить, что это
I have to remember that it was a very long process. So first of all, it began as a ruled democracy, and this idea that everything had to be managed. It's a very long time idea, and that's why was liquidated independent media, and there was shown what independent business may suffer. We all remember Khodorkovsky's criminal process. Now they say that the parliament is not a place for a debate. That's the Russian parliament who says that a parliament is not a place to debate. And this is a way in which the civil society has been destroyed. So this ruled, managed democracy just became the idea of managing and controlling everything. And it's really silly to speak, well, to remember that there were a lot of people who said that it was dangerous, it was going to end badly, and that these crimes that are not condemned in the country will go also out of the country. And that's what we are witnessing today.
Yeah, I agree with to some extent. I agree with this argument that Ukraine, democratic Ukraine, potentially European Ukraine, poses some threat to totalitarian regime in Russia because it delegitimizes it. But I would consider this not as a main problem. I would consider this issue in a broader context. So yes, Ukraine is a threat, but much more serious threat. When Putin says that Ukraine is existential threat to Russia, and he says this openly, he defines Ukraine as anti-Russia, and this is why it should be destroyed. Yes, it's existential threat to Russia, but not only because it can be democratic and to represent some attractive example for Russian people. Yes, it can be. But I believe that Ukraine is a threat in more profound sense. Ukraine delegitimizes all the historical mythology of Russian Empire, which was constructed, which was centered on appropriation of Ukrainian identity, of Ukrainian geography, of Ukrainian history. Russian imperial identity was built upon Ukrainian identity. So, of course, they are incompatible. They can't coexist. Last semester, I taught two courses, one offline in Princeton about Ukraine-Russian relations, and the other one online for Erasmus students in the University of Warsaw. And the title of the course was 300-Year War, about Ukraine-Russian relations. So relations which, since 18th century, are kind of a war. Since the very emergence of Russian Empire, it tried to eliminate Ukraine by various methods. First of all, by assimilation, of course. But when assimilation did not work, they applied different methods. They applied Holodomor, they applied deportations, and now, of course, all-out war. But basically, the policy all the time the same, just because these two entities are incompatible. Imperial Russia cannot coexist with any Ukraine, but even more with democratic Ukraine, even more with European Ukraine. So this is kind of existential matter. And if it was about territory, if it was about Crimea, NATO, whatever, it can be solved, it can be negotiated. But it's about Ukraine's existence. And this is why all these talks about negotiations, about peace solutions, they are groundless, they are nonsensical. You know, this option does not exist. That's the problem.
Speakers, thank you very much we could continue for another hour, I'm sure. I want to encourage everybody in the room to read Mykola Riabchuk's books. I want everybody in the room to read and support Kavkazский Uzel, the publication of Grigory Shvedov. And I want everybody in the room to continue to admire and to support Memorial and the wonderful Elena Zhemkova who came tonight to be with us. Thank you very much for your attention.